What's up guys, my name is Jake, and welcome to Abandoned, episode 100. Can you believe it? I'll of course talk more about the insane 11-year run of this series, and give you all a very special announcement at the end of this video. But for now, I want to revisit the topic that started it all, Discovery Island. It's a place that, to this day, stands completely abandoned, not far away from the most visited theme park in the world. Though, from the sky, you might not be able to catch it. But this of course isn't what it always used to look like. Unlike the vast and sprawling complex that makes up the northern end of Walt Disney World today, Seven Seas Lagoon didn't even exist prior to the 1960s. Bay Lake, however, did, as did the island in its center. Prior to Disney, this whole area was sparsely populated with hundreds of acres of wilderness and very little development. Bay Lake and the island in the middle were barely developed, though its ownership would change hands a few times through the early 20th century. The island in the middle of Bay Lake would eventually be sold to a man named Joel Riles in 1906, and as a result, he would name it Riles Island, though it would also be known as Raz Island in the local press. Regardless, Joel would lose his ownership through the early 20th century, and after another few owners took over, the island would end up being sold to a man named Delmar Nicholson in 1937. Nicholson was a bit of a local celebrity, going by Radio Nick. He was known for building some of the first radio sets, and as a result, opened up his own radio repair shop. He was also a civic leader and quite eccentric, deciding to live on the island with his wife and pet crane. He renamed the site to Idle Bay Isle, and even began growing his own fruit, clearing out large parts of the interior of the island and setting up a small farm for the growing of limes and mangoes. By the 1940s, Nick would even host guests on the island, like the local Girl Scout leaders as well as local VIPs, to enjoy what he called his tropical paradise. But Nicholson's unique Orange County paradise wouldn't last forever. By the early 1950s, Nick had sold the island, though he likely continued to live on it under different owners. In 1955, a group of investors would purchase the island and the nearby land, intending to develop it for campsites and residential properties. At the time of the purchase, Radio Nick's home on the island was the only man-made standing structure. The new investors called this area the Bay Isle Club, though little would materialize from their grand development plans. Just a small fishing and hunting camp was set up on the shores of Bay Lake across from the island. Thanks to this lack of development, the site then caught the eye of Walt Disney himself, as he and his executives flew over areas of Florida they were interested in acquiring. This was all for Disney's East Coast expansion for Epcot. As the story goes, this particular island in Bay Lake was of great interest to Walt Disney, and played a part in him choosing this site. So in 1965, through shell corporations, the Disney Corporation had taken ownership of the land. Now, of course, Walt Disney himself or his company would never see through Walt's original Epcot dreams, though the company was still very much working on building a themed entertainment center, quickly becoming known as Walt Disney World. Even though it had seen various names throughout the years, the official state land surveys had continued to refer to the island within Bay Lake as Riles Island. Through the late 1960s, as Project Florida had begun to take form, various ideas were thrown around on what to do with the island. In early publicly shown master plans, the site was known as Blackbeard's Island. This original concept was to call for a usable land expansion, now building the island up to around 11.5 acres. It was planned to have large, multiple wooden and beachside forts, all with a heavy pirate motif. This was likely going to be loosely themed off the recently released Disney comedy Blackbeard's Ghost. Disney had marketed this island as a children's playground, a place to escape with moonlight cruises. So during the construction of Walt Disney World, excavation from the newly built Seven Seas Lagoon and the temporarily drained Bay Lake was all added to the island, up to around 55,000 cubic yards of soil. Along with clearing out the interior of the island and the installation of a permanent dock, Walt Disney World Phase 1 was already over budget, and with over $324,000 already spent on the island expansion, the Blackbeard project was moved to a later phase. The island was now considered a coming soon attraction, slated as a concept and preliminary design by the time Walt Disney World had opened to the public in 1971. The island did continue to appear on public maps and master plan sketches, but for the time being, it would sit vacant and undeveloped. This was until late 1972, when the company announced that it would open the following year as a relatively subtle spot for picnicking amongst lush landscaping. This was all with the promise of even further development later on, making good on their original pirate themes with elaborate forts to explore, and even a replica shipwreck of the schooner the Hispaniola, which was now themed from the 1950s Disney film Treasure Island. And just like that film, the new experience would now be named Treasure Island. By this point, Disney budgets for new theme park projects had been considerably drawn back. The 1973 oil crisis meant the company was scaling back or outright postponing large construction projects. However, Treasure Island had the land already prepped for construction, and with significantly scaled down plans, this would be a relatively cheap investment that could add more capacity. It would also build out their plans for a wilderness retreat around the campground just offshore. So after a few months of construction, Treasure Island would officially open to the public on April 8th, 1974. Among the lush, imported tropical landscaping, the island was developed to feature wooden walkways, waterfalls, beaches, and large open grass areas to picnic and stroll. But the real draw here was now the animals. Disney created interactive animal exhibits throughout, with over 150 birds, mammals, and reptiles, an experience all tied together with that pirate theme. There was of course a shipwreck on the beach, now called the Walrus, which kids could climb and explore, along with buried treasure in the sand, skeleton remains amongst the high-flying pirate masts, and cast members all wearing pirate costumes. Treasure Island was not all that heavily advertised when it first opened. Only some light marketing around the parks and a full-page spread in the Orlando Sentinel marked its opening. Disney was happy with the attraction though, as by its first year of operation, they claimed it was already profitable. But that's not to say it wasn't somewhat lackluster. The island was pretty bare bones, especially given the original design intentions. In fact, just a small bathroom area stood as the only guest building on the island. Everything else was all outside and pretty sparse. Though in the early 1974 guide maps, Disney was promising future attractions to the park, like Spyglass Hill, a fort-style playground for kids, and even further plans making good on those original ideas for the wreck of the Hispaniola. But these would never materialize. Instead, by the end of 1975, the island would close for a 6-month renovation. Disney would now add a new snack bar, various new themed structures, plus additional animal viewing areas, including a new aviary section with elevated walkways. But still, the name Treasure Island and the promise of pirate adventures didn't exactly materialize in the way that Disney had marketed. So by 1978, Disney would officially drop the pirate theme and name, now rebranding the attraction to Discovery Island. This new incarnation would focus more on the zoological and botanical strengths of the experience, now marketing the park as a tropical paradise, a place to see exotic birds and plants, but also unique mammals up close, like Galapagos turtles, alligators, miniature deer, and even primates like the marmoset. Ultimately, the park would become one of the largest walk-through aviary displays in the world. And by this point, it was already accredited by the American Zoo and Aquarium Association. Among the various animal exhibits and limited guest concessions, animal handlers would put on various shows throughout the day. One such zookeeper was Christine Morbido, who worked on the island through the early to mid-1990s.
The crowd that we got, a lot of them were annual Disney people, and they always made a point to come to the island because the island was so unique. You had to take a boat out there, and it was so different from the rest of Disney. Just everything was clean and perfect, and the island was so not like that. The island was wild, but we had a fairly decent crowd. Our shows were always full. The audience was full in our shows. I remember thinking at the time, there was no way they were going to close that island.
Christine also worked with Matt Edmonds, a bird trainer for the park.
I get very close to the animals I work with, and I've spent years building these tight relationships with them. I mean, when you think about it, if you're letting a bird go out in the world to fly, it can fly anywhere it wants. So you have to have a good relationship with the bird for it not only to want to come back, but to think that you are the safest place it can go. Basically, once you got to the island, it had the feel of a little Pacific island in the middle of nowhere, and it's quiet and it's cool and there's beautiful birds and you can relax. People really responded.
This is how Discovery Island would continue to evolve, leaning ever more into its uniqueness and conservation abilities.
The island is bursting with subtle energy, and like sirens in the wind, it calls Disney Vice President Kim Murphy back time after time.
It's kind of a magical location on our property. But I think for me, well, for instance, when we were building Epcot, when I wanted to escape and decompress from the 20-hour days, I hopped on the boat and I came to this island. And I spent a lot of many hours, well, I shouldn't say many, I was working most of the time, but I spent many of my hours of relaxation right here because it's beautiful, it's serene, and it's kind of shows you some of the best of what Mother Nature is all about.
The park would later build several animal care facilities, including an animal hospital, caring for protected and endangered species. In fact, the island was home to the last dusky seaside sparrow until it died in 1987, later being classified as officially extinct. While the number of visitors and animals grew, Disney wouldn't totally get off with a perfect record. Discovery Island always had an issue with wild vultures. They would sometimes disturb guests and animal exhibits. But in 1989, Walt Disney World and 5 employees were facing 16 state and federal charges of animal cruelty. This turned out to be a pretty large scandal that was written about extensively in the press, and honestly, for good reason too. These charges were pretty bad, and Disney corporate stayed completely silent and demanded their employees to do the same. Ultimately, those employees who were involved were demoted, and Disney agreed to pay out $95,000, avoiding having to go to court. As a result, they had the charges dropped. Protocols would change, and as new management came in, the entire island would operate with better animal care. They would also crucially keep their zoo and aquarium association status. By 1994, the island was now being sponsored by the pet food brand Friskies, and attendance continued to stay pretty steady with very high guest satisfaction. Through this time, the island would continue to operate as normal, hosting curious guests and caring for its now over 150 species of animals. However, Disney was also working on an animal-based theme park in the background, one that was set to dwarf Discovery Island. This new park, dubbed Disney's Wild Animal Kingdom, later renamed to Disney's Animal Kingdom, was publicly announced in 1995. Animal Kingdom was set to essentially become a much larger and more mainstream adaptation of what Discovery Island already was. However, cast members on the island were told to breathe a little easier, as management seemed to feel pretty confident on their job security. John Brugan, who worked there from the mid-1990s right to the very end, remembers it well.
At some point, the rumor of Animal Kingdom became real, and they started building that. And they then created animal programs, which was now combining all of us that had anything to do with animals on Disney property. We're all under this big umbrella. But then at some point, one of the higher management guys came over and wanted a meeting with all of our employees, which was kind of rare. And so the director and I and all these employees kind of gathered together, and he said to us, look, Animal Kingdom's going to be a big deal, and we're going to hire the best of the best, and they're going to be zoo directors who come and work for us as curators. And so you guys are great, you're doing well here, but we don't need you at Animal Kingdom, so don't bother applying. And so it was a real morale killer for the entire team. No one expected that. But again, the promise was laid down. Don't worry, Discovery Island's going to be here. You guys, your job is secure. And we're just going to move forward with what we're doing.
While Animal Kingdom continued its construction on the other side of Walt Disney World property, in 1987, the Orlando Sentinel published an article that seemed to indicate quite a different sentiment by Disney management. They quoted Al Wise, Walt Disney World's president at the time, who admitted that Discovery Island's attendance would be impacted by the opening of the new park. The article went on to speculate new uses, from a wilderness camp based on The Lion King to highly exclusive honeymoon cottages. Wise went on to say that, quote, "What we ultimately do with Discovery Island, we haven't determined. While those concepts were at the very least legitimately considered, another project was also in the works. This one based around the 1993 interactive video game Myst. It had been floating around as a rumor for years through the 90s, though it was actually later confirmed by the game's creators in 2016. While it never got out of the conceptual phase, it was clear that Disney had been instructing creatives to begin thinking of new ways to reuse the island. In the meantime, the company continued to advertise the park, and it operated as normal. By April 22, 1998, Disney's Animal Kingdom had officially opened to the public, and cast members on the island did see some drop in attendance. Though some that I spoke to chalked this up to a complete drop in advertising. Disney no longer displayed it on park tickets or even advertised it at the boat docks, severely diminishing the amount of guests who even knew the island existed. Most likely, Disney wanted to prop up their new flashy Animal Kingdom theme park, and not the relatively small, little revenue generating experience in Bay Lake. It was also potentially a way for park operations to sabotage its popularity and give an excuse to shut it down. It certainly wouldn't be the first time. So, on March 26, 1999, Disney announced that Discovery Island would close permanently a month later on April 8th. A Disney spokesperson told the Orlando Sentinel that, quote, "Our guests have so many more choices, and they are choosing other things." They would later tell the Sentinel that attendance was disappointing, though gave no further details. While this announcement wasn't a huge surprise to guests or industry observers, it certainly seemed to be for those who were working there.
You know, at some point there was the next big meeting was someone coming over and saying, well, we've got bad news. We are closing Discovery Island, and you've got 1 year to get all of these people off the island and all of the animals off the island. And so my job went from kind of managing these 12 people or so to basically having resume writing parties in my office to try to help them find a spot. But then also we started worrying about where are our favorite animals going to end up. Of course, Animal Kingdom took a few of those, but really, honestly, most of those birds in the aviary went to a zoo in Africa somewhere. Literally, for years, there was the promise, the word of upper management, this place is a gem, it will always be here. So yeah, it was dumbfounding and heartbreaking. It was tearful and, you know, all the stages of grief.
Following the closure, which ended up happening a few days after the official April 8th date, the island's 25-year run had come to an end. Most expected that following the closure, Disney would immediately begin work on something new, or at least acknowledge its future. But in reality, there was nothing.
Later on, I have friends that worked at DAC who said, well, we need a new refrigerator, and there's not one in the budget. And they just got on a boat and went to Discovery Island and found a refrigerator still sitting there with some bowls in it and some cellophane over it and some moldy food in it, you know, and somebody had unplugged the fridge and walked away, and that was kind of the end of that. I could never imagine that we could be sitting here 25 years later and be having a conversation that Disney did nothing with that property.
Disney would send a team to the island to salvage useful and valuable items. While in 2003, reports came in of spotted Imagineers and managers walking the shores of the former park. But through all of this time, everything was still left as it was. Even the expansive guest dock remained fixed on Bay Lake, the frame of the former sign still standing. But clearly maintenance on the island itself was nearly non-existent, as the shores quickly became consumed by foliage. The former shipwreck along the beach was now falling apart. Disney was still silent on its future, and the mystery of what the interior of the park now looked like was drawing curiosity. In early 2005, photographer and urban explorer Shane Perez made the audacious journey to capture what it looked like. Under the cover of darkness, Shane and his two friends made a 300-foot swim from the now also abandoned river country. The island looming in the distance from the perspective of an abandoned water park, which at this point still had some of the perimeter lights on, was an eerie sight. After making the swim to the island, they took photos of the ominous shoreline and the former main dock. As they got further inside the island, the thick tree line made the pitch-black, overgrown guest pathways difficult to traverse. As they got further inside the island, Perez and his friends would only get to explore a small portion of the island. Though the few buildings he did get into showed not only the level of decay, but everything that was left behind, like snakes preserved in jars and Coke bottles. Photos even showed that the power was still connected, with deteriorating fluorescent lights permanently on within one of the storage buildings. What he captured was truly remarkable. But as it turns out, it wasn't just photos. What you're watching right now is never-before-seen footage of the island that Shane and his friends took during that 2005 expedition. This footage is now the earliest known video documentation of the island.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have accomplished the impossible. We're on Discovery Island. There's still dark here. We're actually starting exploring. Someone has swam the breadth of this lake to infiltrate an abandoned portion of the Walt Disney World resort. I love the sounds of this place. This will be my last message. Somebody's been here. 2003? Is that what you said? Yeah, somebody came here in 2003.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
04, dude. 12/21/04, Heather. Jillian.
People have done this.
This footage is from a camcorder recording onto mini DV tape on a night vision setting. And given the fact that this island was pitch black and that it was 2005, obviously the quality is challenging. It looks like it's straight out of a found footage horror film. But it does give an idea of just how surreal the island at night must have been. A visceral and otherworld-like environment filled with sounds and creatures. This was clear evidence that despite walking into structures and flipping on the lights, Discovery Island was quickly returning back to nature.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've discovered a room full of goodies. There's a dead snake in a Diet Coke bottle. There's a dead snake in a Diet Coke bottle. Among the funniest things ever.
There we got photographs of this place being operational. Probably. I guess it says Discovery Island. Which one? Well, she's got a Discovery Island shirt on.
Perez would ultimately wait until the statute of limitations in Florida for trespassing had passed before releasing just the photos he took in an online blog post. When he finally did, years after his expedition, these photos were the first public view inside the park since its closure. These photos made local news, fueling the intrigue even further. By 2006, Disney finally began to take down the large dock, a possible signifier that no big work was in store for the island. Instead, over the course of just a few months, the dock and its wooden pilings would all be removed, leaving just the former entrance structure with an abrupt drop-off and a half-partitioned wooden gate. From the water, guests could now clearly see foliage starting to take over much of the former beach area and the structures once clearly visible. The only change came with a small service dock and shed that had now become the only way to access the island by employees. A few years later, in 2008, urban explorer Nomius had posted on his website, flurbex.com, their own expedition. Instead of swimming, they would take boats and row to the park, once again under the cover of darkness. They too would only explore a portion of the island, but like Perez around 4 years prior, they would find an even more overgrown abandoned park, still with power connected. They would make it as far as another storage building that contained rotting samples in unplugged refrigerators. This was the last time anyone would publicly see what the island looked like for a while. And from the outside, the island's foliage continued to absorb the remaining structures within. Its sheer inaccessibility and little documentation, especially during daylight hours, continued to lift the former park into mythic-like status, a place lost to time. It's a story that certainly caught my eye, which is what ultimately led me to create my first abandoned video ever on YouTube in 2014. Disney's security had also become quite notorious by this point, and it seemed that any expeditions to the island were less and less likely to be successful. Disney still hadn't publicly talked about the park, though in 2016 they did install a chain-link fence with a wildlife warning at the former main entrance structure. This was less about keeping trespassers out and more likely a workplace safety response to the alligator death at Grand Floridian. As everything continued to rot away in the interior of the property, this was the only visual change made to the former park. But it wouldn't be long until someone else made their way to the park. In May of 2017, Matt Sonswa had launched off from the River Country service dock at around 3 a.m. He and his friend Chris would row to the island and post several videos of it on YouTube. He would return a few days later, posting a higher quality, longer video, and then return a third time in late 2018, posting an even higher quality, gimbaled 4K footage. These videos were the first time the park had not only been filmed since its closure, but the first time it had been seen in daylight since 1999. The footage is honestly pretty remarkable. Matt explored the entire island, walking the former guest pathways and peering through the former structures. This footage showed the incredible level of decay. Since the park had seen little to no intervention by anyone, everything there had been left in isolation from 1999. As foliage grew out of control and as wildlife took over, the many standing structures had become consumed by the thick tree canopy. This meant as harsh storms and hurricanes battered the island over the years, large pieces of branches and debris had torn holes through the ceilings of many structures. Guest facilities like the washrooms had completely caved in, all while other structures like the animal hospital had entire walls completely rotted away, now allowing the jungle to creep in. It's truly an incredibly eerie sight. The enormous avian way canopy is now a complete mess. The elevated guest walkways are now partially crushed by the former supports of the massive canopy, now with netting and debris all tangled within. Over at the main entrance area, the concession stand, Thirsty Perch, has also slowly decayed, with a rotting roof and falling debris everywhere. Though the concessions inside, like the Coke machines, all remain. What's especially incredible about all of it, though, is that it remained completely untouched. There's virtually no graffiti or human intervention of any kind. So, remarkably, these buildings have unbroken glass and equipment left behind. Outside of these guest pathways and buildings, the rest of the island is completely overgrown. The former Flamingo Lagoon, the waterfalls, the streams, even the animal exhibits are all almost completely unrecognizable. You would only know that they were animal exhibits by the periodic display plaques dotted around the jungle. Overall, the footage finally demystified the island for many, including myself. It also kicked off a series of other explorers who made the journey, some even camping overnight. Explorers and video creators like Standard Stealth and Seth Borden all explored the island between 2018 and early 2020. This whole saga kind of kicked off a resurgence of urban exploration in Walt Disney World. A saga which is all covered in all of its insane detail in a feature documentary that I executive produced called Stolen Kingdom. It's directed by my friend Josh Bailey, and if you're interested in watching it, you can follow these social media accounts to stay updated on when it releases on streaming services. Anyways, Disney clearly saw this as a reoccurring problem, one that wasn't going away, and one they just couldn't ignore. Sometime between February and April of 2020, Disney had installed a camera system that evidently would alert their security team if anyone was found on the island. Another explorer, a Florida man who went by Southern Pirate Outdoors, found this out, as he was attempting to camp on the island for around a week. Intending to make a video there, he was caught on camera, and Disney called it in to the local sheriff's office. A comically large manhunt then ensued, with officers boating to the island and helicopters hovering above. This also now meant that there is insane body camera footage of a bunch of Orange County police officers, guns drawn, cutting through the foliage with machetes around the abandoned park. It is very crazy.
I think this was a fun experience.
Eventually, the on-the-ground manhunt concluded unsuccessful, though Southern Pirate Outdoors, whose real name is Richard McGuire, was eventually caught going to shore in a boat. He would later accept a plea deal, paying a $100 fine plus fees, and like all other Discovery Island explorers, he was permanently banned from Walt Disney World. This whole era of exploring on the island was kind of insane, and this story, evidently on a slow news day during the pandemic, literally made national news. But due to this incident, it also now meant that the revival era of exploration on the island was now over. But Disney continued to stay silent about it all. The days in the 90s of executives pondering future attractions to the Orlando Sentinel are largely over. And whenever spokespersons do talk about the former park, they just refer to it as backstage or off-limits property. By 2021, a new fence had been erected at the former maintenance dock, and the shed had now been removed. This time, probably a way to keep people off the island. But that's really it with further updates. experience. Still to this day, if you charter a boat or take Disney's water taxis from the resorts, you can still see the former entrance of the island, and incredibly, even the former shipwreck placed here all the way back in 1974. Of course though, it's in pretty poor condition, as is the entire island. If you look at it from the air though, it's pretty incredible how different it all looks from when it first opened. A lot has happened in the 50 years since it first saw guests. So other than that, there really doesn't seem to be much of a future for the park. Now of course Disney did give an official reason as to why it closed, and while it doesn't fully satisfy everyone, understandably, it does make sense that a brand new theme park that offered a similar experience would be the cause. In fact, in the early 2000s, Disney renamed the center island in Animal Kingdom to Discovery Island. But as I talked to those who worked on and visited the park, they all remember it so fondly. It wasn't some big Disney attraction. It was designed to be a peaceful space to see cool things. That was the whole point. And in fairness, that's not really an experience you can find right now at Animal Kingdom, or really anywhere on Disney property. It is an era of theme park attractions, at least by big companies, that just generally don't exist anymore. But to make matters worse, instead of removing it immediately and replacing it with some new experience as promised, Disney strangely just left it as it was. River Country on the mainland was also curiously left in a similar state. So at one point, Disney World had two separate abandoned theme parks only 300 feet apart from each other. Now, as I understand it, divisions of the company are allotted their own budgets, and it's likely that whichever division of the company that oversees the island just doesn't want to spend their own budget to demolish it. After all, it will likely cost a substantial sum to transport heavy equipment to the island, build new infrastructure just to accommodate them, all to clear out a site that is difficult to access, and one that already isn't too much of an eyesore for guests in the first place. I also spoke with former higher-ups at the company, who also speculated on the potential soil contamination from the wildlife and what heavy construction would do with the potential runoff into the lake. Any future development would also now have to face serious financial and operational challenges to get the green light, and clearly the company hasn't pursued any serious ideas that would get them to that point. Of course, this is all speculation because the public doesn't really know what's going on, and regardless, this is what Disney's chosen to do with it. But that is such a shame. Bay Lake and Discovery Island have such a rich history. This island was one of the reasons why Walt Disney himself chose this land to develop. While there were original grand concepts for the site, Disney would ultimately build something a lot more quaint, but generally really well loved. It was a crushing reality for many on the island who, over their tenure, built strong connections with not only their fellow cast members, but the many animals they were caring for. Seeing it all come to an end was really sad for many. While many employees like Matt had to leave it all behind, some relics of the past would find their way back to them. In fact, Matt would later be reunited with one of his close birds on the island, Quasar, who now, all these years later, lives with him at his home.
Can you see him?
But for many, the island is now a distant memory. Today, we live in a different world, and the Walt Disney Company is not the same as it used to be. It's generally no longer all about building cool experiences that meet moderate profitability. It's about making headlines with new big attractions and streamlining operations, shutting down what operationally costs a lot, no matter how well loved it may be and how much it adds to the experience. Discovery Island was just a victim of that. And by this point, the park has been closed and rotting away longer than it had ever been open. That's pretty remarkable, but it also stands today as a sort of time capsule, a way to see a Disney theme park in total isolation from 1999, a sort of parallel world where the largest theme park company on the planet had become abandoned. It's extremely interesting. And because of that, it will always live on for both its legacy as a charming island retreat, but also one entombed in urban legend, and one that was left completely abandoned. For those who have been watching my work for a while now, or those who are new here, this video is kind of a big deal for me. For a while, I toyed with what I should do to celebrate the big milestone, 100 episodes of Abandoned. I thought about going really crazy, like traveling all the way to the Solomon Islands to see the wreck of the World Discoverer, which believe me, I tried, and who knows, maybe I still will. But I also figured, what better topic to revisit than one that started it all? For those who don't know, this channel was originally all about gaming, but But after doing it for 2 years, I eventually just got bored with it. They were also really bad videos. I eventually started this series in 2014 because I wanted to share something cool I found on the internet that no one else had made an informational video about. So I made the first abandoned video because I just wanted to share this cool thing with everyone else. It was the type of video I wish existed on YouTube, so I made it myself, even though it is awful by today's standards. I was only 16 years old at the time. It is interesting how fate played out though. When I released that video, I was getting ready to shut down the channel and call it quits on YouTube entirely. I even wrote a script and literally had planned to shut it all down later that year. But then, the sudden popularity of that video, gaining more views and common interest than I had ever seen before, made me reconsider stepping away. I then decided to make another episode, and another. That video, this series, effectively saved this channel, and created what is now my full-time career. And because of that, I've been afforded so many opportunities, been able to see cool places, given the ability to travel, express my interest in so many ways, and had a wonderful and caring audience through it all. All because a 16-year-old Jake rightfully thought an abandoned island in Disney was cool. It also led me to my ultimate goal, making a feature documentary about a location I first covered on the series. And people often ask me when I'll be making my next. Well, I'm very excited to announce that the answer is right now. Over the last nearly 2 years, myself and my fantastic team have been filming my next big documentary. It doesn't have a name just yet, and we still have a long road ahead, so don't get too excited for the immediate future. But I can confirm that it will be about the rise and fall of the American shopping mall. Of course, we're going to have our own very unique spin on the story, with stuff never before captured, which I am obviously very excited about. Again, we still have a long road ahead, and a full release still won't be for a while, so take this as a very early tease. But if you do want to stay up to date, make sure you follow Bright Sun Films on Instagram and Twitter for any updates. I'll of course keep you all updated here on YouTube as well, so make sure you subscribe too. I do have a lot more information about the film on my Patreon, with a podcast going up there very soon talking all about it. So that's it. If you're new here, thanks for being a part of this very special 100th episode, and if you've been watching for a while, thank you so much for sticking around. My name is Jake, and as always, thank you very much for watching.
Well, south side of Chicago